My panel is back with me. And Joey, I got to ask about this enterprise, because for many people, a racketeering and RICO case is all about, well, they think about the mob. They got to prove that there was a group of people who were conspiring together for a common goal. They're saying it's the inner circle and the chiefs of staff. Is that going to be enough?
Defense hat. Look, the reality is that this is a music mogul and icon. He had an organization for purposes of developing what was a brand. That brand was extraordinarily successful. So you mean to tell me that he created this organization as a cover so that he could gratify his sexual desires? Defense point, ridiculous. The reality is that this is his sex life on trial. Everyone may have their own proclivities. Everyone may think something is good, bad, or indifferent. Does it make it criminal? So at the end of the day, you do look at a criminal enterprise as mobsters, etc. Is this that?
But how do they go from the idea of running my business to that?
Well, Joey and I come from the same place. We're both former prosecutors together. So I'm going to wear the prosecutor hat now. I'll steal that one back on. That's right. That's right. So anyway, there's a structure here, and it's a criminal purpose. It's not just, some legitimate business, selling clothes and making business. The argument is that the structure here is with P. Diddy, Sean Combs at the top. It's structured down at different levels and different people with that criminal objective and goal. And all collectively, they shared that goal. And what was that goal? That goal was to provide him, among other things, these drugs to get women in the place, in a position to bring them across state lines, to engage them in sex against their will, to force them and coerce them. Now, is that going to sell? To your point, with your hat back on, that's not an easy lift. But the reason why the prosecution is doing this in part is whatever evidence you may not otherwise have been able to bring in, you're bringing this whole umbrella and you're scooping it all into the case. And now you have that. And to a certain extent, you could say, even if you don't believe that this was a criminal enterprise, it was still an organization, or P. Diddy still brought these across the line.
But umbrella or kitchen sink, that's the risk though, right? You have the jurors thinking, you're just throwing everything in here. Stacey?
Yeah, it's a big stretch. He clearly didn't invent this big music empire and clothing empire so he could run around Hollywood like Joey was saying and allegedly assault women. What this really is a sexual abuse trial disguised as a racketeering trial, because the federal government is really not able to bring sex abuse charges. There's no federal statute for that. The only statute that's really federal here is transporting individuals over interstate commerce, interstate lines to engage in prostitution. But the sex trafficking may not be federal. So they've taken things that are prosecuted on a state level, all these underlying acts that we're going to hear about, we've started hearing about, the alleged sex abuse. We're going to hear about arson. We're going to hear about bribery, coercion, kidnapping, all these things. He's not charged with any of those things. And this is a very creative and I would say a little bit bizarre prosecution coming from the Southern District of New York to go to this extent to prosecute Sean Combs. There are other ways to do it. One more thing I want to say, and I know you're going to disagree with me, but not one of the civil alleged victims who filed lawsuits against him, and now we're over 65 people who have filed some type of monetary damages case against Sean Combs for something he has done to them. Not one person has gone to the police and pressed charges against him.
Well, Elizabeth, Cassie Ventura is going to be there to testify tomorrow, and she is probably the creme de la creme in terms of who we're talking about of civil lawsuits there.
She is, and as I said before, this trial, this case would not exist without Cassie Ventura. Now, I do want to make the point, as everybody knows here, but some of our viewers may not know, this case is completely separate from the 60-plus civil claims that Sean Combs is facing. Now, of course, the jury is instructed every single morning, do not read about this, do not watch the news, they're not supposed to be watching us right now. But I think the defense knows that it's pretty hard to find a completely unbiased jury when your defendant is Sean Combs, a world-famous superstar who's been in the headlines. All of these civil claims did have, I shouldn't say all, but many, the majority, had different allegations that some of Sean Combs' team, whether it was bodyguards, assistant, chief of staff, that they were assisting in this alleged activity. So I just want to point that the civil cases, even though it's completely separate from this criminal trial, there is some mirroring in there with the allegations.
No, excellent point, Elizabeth. But my issue is, defense point, you're running this organization which has transformed you into a superhuman person who's had an impact upon a generation. And the very reason you did that and organized your staff and became, all that he did that because he wanted to exploit women sexually.
Well, is it mutually
That is a major
Oh, wait, answer that
overreach,
question. Is it
right?
mutually exclusive?
Well, let me answer the question. And the question is, if it's the defense, if it's the prosecution's theory that the nature and purpose of this criminal enterprise was to satisfy his sexual desires, my view from the defense perspective is that is ridiculous. Were there instances where it was transformed and he had this freaky lifestyle and freaky relationship? Great, maybe he did. Is that, and does that make him a racketeer? Does that make him a person who organized this for the sole purpose 20-something years ago so that he can do just what we're talking about now? Does not make sense. And does the tape, let's come back to it, right? Let them play the prosecution every day and every night. Does that demonstrate that he, A, engaged in racketeering, B, that he engaged in sex trafficking, and C, that he engaged in prostitution?
Well, listen,
Right.
Watching the jurors today in the courtroom, I was watching to see how they were reacting to these videos. Were they leaning in? Were they leaning out? Were they shaking their heads? I got to tell you, some were visibly responding to what they saw, even though the voir dire questions, fancy way of saying the questions I asked you on the jury, they'd already admitted to having seen that. But they were still a little bit taken aback because they saw it multiple times and beyond. But there was a moment, Elizabeth, in the courtroom today when we were looking to see if the family of Diddy would actually view the video as well. And they were watching it. They had a reaction as well to seeing this because, again, they know at least one of the victims, and there's one more under a pseudonym who we're going to hear more about.
That's right. And there was one point where Sean Combs's mother, Janice, she was actually, her face was covered, so she wasn't watching that. And you have to assume that she has seen this tape before. It's been playing over and over across social media, on the news. But that, again, the human element, the family's there, that's got to be hard. But aside from the family, just something interesting about the tape that I've been thinking about, Laura, is you remember last week during jury selection, Combs's lead defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, he said the video is the most important piece of evidence in this entire trial. We know his team had numerous attempts to eject that from evidence. Now, of course, the tables have turned, the story has changed a bit. Now it's, oh no, this doesn't show any criminal activity. This just shows jealousy. In fact, Tenny Garrigo said during her opening statement, jealousy was on full display during this night. So of course they have to have a defense for that. They've said from day one when our team broke that tape, they said that this was domestic violence. This was essentially a relationship gone wrong.
And notice, guys, look for this in the trial. They're going to focus on the phone in Diddy's hand in that hallway of the hotel more than the violence that ensued. Stay tuned on why. Thank you so much, everyone.